Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble! Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Toon Review YouTube channel, where tonight is a very, very special night because we have a very special guest with us. It is none other than Henry Winter, who we'll be bringing on in just a second. Thank you, everybody, for watching tonight. Obviously, I know it's a Friday night, but everybody's looking forward to the game tomorrow lunchtime. And it's a perfect time, really, to reminisce with Henry over times following Newcastle United, which would be a fantastic story. If you do have any questions for Henry, please do feel free to put them in the comments. Obviously, we can't read them all out, but we'll get through as many as we can. Yeah, we'll bring in the main man himself. Good evening, Henry.
Hi, how you doing? Thanks for having me on. Everyone's smiling up in Newcastle at the moment. Why is that?
Well, I don't know, something to do with the takeover. I'm not too sure. Happy times have arrived. A certain Eddie Howe, a certain few players who've really excelled under Eddie Howe. It's completely changed, all for the better.
It's great to feel that buzz because I was fortunate to cover the Keegan era, and that's the buzz there, and the buzz of games like, actually bumped into, not name dropping because he was working for Danish TV, but Pete Schmeichel was in the press room at City the other night, and he was still talking about that Philippe Albert goal.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, that was amazing. That was it. Did you come out with a video? So was it Hawaii 5-0 or something?
Hawaii 5-0, yeah, that was it. For Hawaii 5-0, whatever you want to say. Yeah, it was in all the popular DVD shops and video shops. Yeah,
look, you live in one of the great football cities. You've got one of the great football supports, and it is fantastic to see people smiling and passionate about the team again.
Well, obviously, I've met you a couple of times when you were speaking to Dave at the food bank and things like that, and you must have noticed such a big difference between the atmosphere from times gone by under Mike Ashley to what it is now. I mean, we're just talking before we came on there about what it's like for me personally after a match now, when we come down past the players' entrance and we've won and everybody's singing Eddie Howe's name, everybody's high-fiving each other rather than just having their heads down. And we used to call it the walk of shame.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you mentioned Dave, and what a great man he was. And I didn't know him particularly well, but whenever I came up and walked past the food bank and sort of chatted to you guys, Dave was just, for me, he sort of represented what's great about your city. There was a real substance there. There was a lot I didn't know to him about was he into archery and things like that, and he was just a really interesting guy. But he was there because he wanted to help, because he was passionate about the team. And so, belatedly, my condolences go out to his family and many friends. And it's brilliant what you do in the food bank there. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if Ian Byrne, the Labour MP, who was very heavily involved in the Liverpool / Everton food bank, I don't know whether he's coming to the game tomorrow, but he's, what you do in this society in the 21st century with the food banks, I think is absolutely vital. So I doff my hat to you for that.
Yeah, there's some marvelous people volunteer. I know quite a few of them, and always stop to chat with them on the way to the game, and they love doing it because there's a sense of community when they do it. And Dave knew everybody, and everybody seemed to sort of angle for Dave's bucket whenever they were passing. They had a little conversation with him. If there was a family that put money in the bank, he'd make a big fuss of the family, and he always put himself second. I said to quite a few people leading up to Dave passing that I didn't think he was too well the last few weeks, talking to him and things like that. But that's what Dave was good at, hiding it and concentrating on other people. And he made a habit of doing that.
he was very clever because he would often say to me, he said, is it Danny Rubin? Whatever,
Yes.
whatever
Jamie
you
Rubin,
make, whatever you make, I think he matches.
Mm-hmm.
in cash. So he would look at me, so get the wallet out and say, right, you better have everything because it's sort of, it's happy hour, you're getting double your cash because the Rubens are chipping in. And I think, I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a period of applause during one of the games, and I think the club helped facilitate that. And I think again that shows the different mood at the club, that the club were prepared to sort of do something like that.
Yeah. I still think Jamie Rubin does that now. He matches whatever they make on the day.
Yeah, I believe he does.
Which is an absolutely fantastic gesture from him. That just proves to show how far we've come. And like I told you on the phone, Henry, the family was sent flowers and things like that when Dave passed away. They didn't realise how popular Dave was. And you mentioned about the archery there and things like that. He was part of the London 2012 committee and things like that. So there was a lot to Dave that a lot of people didn't know. But when his picture came up on the scoreboard in the 69th minute, to see the whole ground stand up and applaud, I mean, I was emotional, as you can expect, being one of his good friends, but a lot of emotion was in that applause, and his family just did not have a clue how popular he was.
But in desperate times for them, and our hearts obviously go out to them, how important to have that, to know that the club, the community that he was so, emotionally engaged with, that they felt so, the community and the club and the team felt so much for him. So that is a crutch in difficult times for them. Yeah,
I mean, the conversations that you had, you must have felt the kind of warmth that he had. Whenever you popped down to the food bank when you were in Newcastle.
Yeah, I just had a sense of humour. He had a sort of twinkle in his eye.
Yeah, he did.
And you always, whenever I sort of finished a conversation with him, because normally I was late and I was sort of hurrying into the ground, I was always thinking, he'd be a really interesting guy to go for a drink with. Was that nice? Well, there are not many there's so many bars close by. I could just imagine saying, well, I'll skip the first half and I'll go and have a pint with him in the Strawberry. Or I'll go to, is it the Irish Centre? Just sort of down there. I've got lost in there a couple of times, not having drunk and everything, but just, I could just imagine sitting with Dave in the corner and just sort of wanting to know a little bit more about his life story, because you just knew there was a man who'd lived a life.
He did. And like I say, his family had no idea. I mean, Alex, you didn't know Dave for very long. He was on the show with me hosting when you joined the channel, and you got that sense of warmth as well, didn't you?
Indeed, yeah. I took a lot of inspiration from how he spoke and came across talking about football and his own city. He wasn't the loudest of people. He would choose when to speak. His silences were well placed, and he would say the right things. And as a younger fan, it was kind of inspiring, and it was nice. He was very supportive of me, and I do try and sort of think about how he would respond to certain things in regards to the club, because his etiquette was just spot on. He was a very clever man.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I used to wind him up saying that his archery was matchstick thrown, and he used to punch me in the arm quite a few times after that, and forever chasing me with a bucket as soon as I arrived on the scene in Newcastle. So yeah, a fantastic man and a huge miss, but hopefully he's looking down, really pleased about what's happened this year. We've got a question already from Gary. He says, Henry, did you really expect the mighty Newcastle to be where they are now, or was the overall opinion that we were down and out? I mean, how did you feel earlier on in the season?
I think the last time you played Newcastle, what, your 19th? And then when Eddie came in, look, you knew that there would be a lift when Mike Ashley left. You knew that there would be a lift when Steve Bruce left. I've known Eddie Howe for a fair few years. I've interviewed him at Bournemouth. People talk about the sort of, the Burnley issue and should that be a mark against his career, but there were personal issues that he, not with him, but in his family, that he had to resolve, and that's why he left. So Burnley should be not really included in his CV. Although I noticed he's actually gone back for one of the Liverpool analysts that he knew from Burnley, Mark Leyland, who I think is a fantastic signing. I mean, he won't get all the sort of, I think Klopp was talking about him today.
Yeah, so he quoted him.
Yeah, which is good, Alex. But this is what I like about what they're doing. Your owners are doing, is that it's not a revolution. They're doing it very sensibly. They're going out and getting good people, and they've got a good manager in Eddie Howe. 4 or 5 years' time, you may get an upgrade. You may get, I don't know, a Klopp or someone of that ilk. But I just think it's really nice just to see good football people being given a chance. And maybe I'm slightly surprised that Eddie Howe's on, but I've always been a supporter. Supporter is probably the wrong word, but always been an admirer of his. And I've been in his office in really difficult circumstances at Bournemouth when they were really facing difficult times. And he was very calm then. And he'll be very calm now. I haven't talked to him for a while, but he'll be very calm now in terms of the success. Was it 4 straight wins, 9th? I mean, I'm old enough to remember CFAX, and now you don't have to wait for the page to turn to see when Newcastle.
Yeah, I remember that. Table. I still remember it was 3-3-1 for the top division.
Yeah, absolutely.
CFAX 3-3-1. Never forget that.
Yeah, well, we're showing our age here a little bit.
I know.
Yeah. CFAX was, how to explain it to Alex? It was like a very early sort of social media Google, but you had to wait for things to happen. But just on Eddie, he's a really interesting guy. There's a lot of hinterland to him. You know, just little things. I think he's got a tattoo. I think it's on his left arm or his right arm, just with the name of his. He had a beloved dog. He's a very he's a very sort of warm individual. As you've seen, you know, you've seen the photographs after the game. You've seen his connection, obviously, with you guys, and most importantly, the connection with the players. He's a manager that you can trust. He's a manager that doesn't take shortcuts. He'll be the first in the training ground. He'll be the last one out. So I'm still surprised, coming back to your question, that he has, and you have had this huge impact. I didn't expect you to be 9th. I thought you'd be I didn't think you'd go down, but I thought you'd be 14th, 15th.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people said, and I mean it's a lot of sort of outside media outlets claim that all these big name managers are still going to be in the front running for the Newcastle job, and as soon as he faces a little bit of a bad time.
Yeah, we had the Mancini links recently.
Yeah,
as well.
As soon as the results don't go our way, it can turn, and big managers will be named. But I think the general feeling for Eddie amongst the Newcastle fans is we want him to be the next Keegan. I would love that to happen, but and do something which obviously Kevin didn't do was win something, and he's got the big opportunity to do that.
I think he's a bit better tactically than Kevin Keegan. I was a huge admirer of Kevin's teams. Yeah. I mean, having been through the 4-3s and all that emotion, let's all pile forward. I mean, Keegan is just one of the. I mean, his story about Keegan. A friend of mine wrote a book with him about 3-4 years ago, and he asked me just to do a Q&A with Kevin at the Cheltenham Festival. And I just interviewed him on stage. It was very easy because he speaks so passionately. And he was there, he was smartly dressed, he arrived early, he was utterly charming to everyone backstage, came on stage, told great stories, a lot of Newcastle fans in the audience. Yeah. And then I said, Kevin, I've got to shoot back. And he said, absolutely no problem. He was there for 2.5 hours afterwards, just signed, he made sure he signed, book for everyone. So look, Keegan's, one of the greats as an individual, obviously as a player, and as a manager in terms of that emotional engagement, but tactically, Eddie's better. I mean, you've already seen his impact on players like Joel Linton, using him different. I mean, you see them every week. You will have seen even more of the impact on players. And I also like some of the signings. Particularly the fullbacks. I mean, I've interviewed, as you do, a lot of people have done. Interviewed Matt Targett. Yeah. He's not flashy. He's just reliable.
He's steady away. He's steady. That's what we love about him.
When you play Saint-Maximin over on that side, Alain Saint-Maximin was not put on this earth to track back. So Targett, in a way, he's whoever's running at him, he's there on his own. Yeah. So, and I think Matt will do that. But one of the best signings, I understand all the emotion and the sort of the love for Bruno, and he's fantastic. And the thing about Bruno is that because you've got him, he will bring other bigger name players, into the club. But I just love Trippier. I love Trippier's attitude. I love his football. I love him. little things about Kieran Trippier. Before a tournament, we always ask him about, how's your dad? Has he got permission from the council to get his Union Jack up for the flag of St George for England? And he says, no, but he's got a huge, great flagpole. He's got a huge, great flag of St George. I think they live in Bury. And I know that I'm going to have to pay the fine from the council because the flag is too big. But this is Trippier enjoys life. He went over to Spain. He did well. The fans loved him there. He played under probably the greatest defensive coach around in Cholo Simeone. But I just love his attitude. Obviously, you've only seen an element of him, but you've already seen his leadership. You've seen his free kick. Was it the one against Everton, which I think was good? I mean, he's just like that. And it's great to hear he's back in training today. But and I'm not saying this purely from an England perspective, don't rush him back. And I mean, Eddie Howe is far too sensible, and the medical staff will be far too sensible. But my experience of players who come back from metatarsals is that they can kick the ball, they look fine. But then remember Rooney in the World Cup, remember Beckham in the World Cup 2002, 2006.
Yeah, both affected, weren't they?
Yeah, flip those two. Give him a little bit of time to get his fitness back. But I think Trippier, because of his personality, no nonsense, let's go to work on the pitch, training, in life. I just think he's just a fantastic role model for so many of the players at the club.
Yeah, he's a winner, isn't he? And he understands what it means to be from the north or the northeast specifically. He understands the passion. If we bring it back to the coaching, no, we've not mentioned Jason Tindall yet. Have you had any experience with Tindall and how much of sort of Eddie Howe's team has influenced what's gone on now and previously?
The two interviews I did with Eddie at Bournemouth, Tindall sat in on them. And I think that was very much Eddie making the point that, I mean, Tindall might have been doing it because he thought long-term he wanted to be a manager and he had a brief stab at that. But I think he's an outstanding number two. The two of them are just such a good couple, the way they work together professionally. There's a real bond there. They almost know what each other's sort of thinking. But the good thing about Tindall is that he's his own man. So I think he will. I mean, Eddie's a very collegiate, Eddie Howe is a very collegiate manager. He will listen to other people, probably listen to one or two of the players. He'll make the final decision, but you will get, he will listen to Tindall. So I've got a lot of time for him, and it was really important that he moved with Eddie. But I think the point that Eddie was trying to make by having Tindall sitting in the in the room was, we're a team. And I think that's Eddie to a T.
I mean, you can see that when they take the photos at the end in the dressing room. Eddie Howe's way at the back. He's out the way. He's not really wanting to get involved. He wants the players and the rest of his staff to be the focal point, if you like. And he doesn't. He just stands in the background, which we've noticed on every single one he does. Gary asks a question here, Henry. I'd like to ask Henry how he sees European football panning out after the attempt of some of the big clubs to form a Super League.
Well, first, thank God for the fans.
Yeah,
the fans of the big, as they like to call them, big six. Fair play to them. Chelsea fans outside Stamford Bridge, Arsenal fans. They all turned on their owners, and quite rightly, and fans across the country. I just think they'll be back. I think at the moment we've got the Champions League slightly doing it with this sort of ridiculous coefficients to sort of squeeze sort of some more historic clubs in. But the owners will be back. If you are an American owner, and it's not simply an anti-American thing, I mean, I don't need to tell you, you had an English owner who was probably one of the top three most unpopular owners in the country. Yes. But I just think if you come from a concept of wanting to generate money, and you come from a sporting background of no promotion and relegation, then you must look at the Premier League and think, well, hang on a sec, look at Everton now. My investment is at risk if they go down. So, yeah, I think they will be back. I think your owners, I mean, I know Amanda and Mad a bit, and I would say, they're genuine football people. You have a conversation with them, and I haven't had a conversation with them for a year or so. When you talk to them, they understand football. They are not people who are just coming. Obviously, they're coming in for financial reasons long term, but they want that emotional connection. They like football. If you have a conversation with either of them, You know, you're not talking to someone who's just walked out of a Wall Street bank. You're talking to someone who actually knows football and understands football.
Yeah.
So I think, and also I think there's such a connection between those two, particularly, and the Rubens and the Newcastle fans, that they would be very aware if anyone around the Northeast suggested a Super League. Because at some point in the next 5-10 years, you will be moving into that area. But I think you've probably seen with the Champions League football being played by Liverpool, Manchester City, and Real Madrid in the last couple of weeks, you've still got a long way to go. But eventually, you will be walking that path.
Well, we have got to play Liverpool tomorrow, so that'll be a true test of where we are now and the mountain we've got to climb, won't it?
Huge
but look, anything's possible. I mean, it's the emotion of St James's Park. I mean, I would put it up in my top 3 of grounds to go to, just in terms of the sheer adrenaline. And also a little thing is, you know, if I usually drive up, but I come up from the station, that is one of the great walks in football. Up from the station, I don't know what you call them, but little ginnels, those little sort of
you'll probably come up through Pink Lane and things like that, little wine shops and
it seems to me they're bars on the right and kebab shops on the left. So it's just a question whether you're swiping right or left, depending on your mood, sort of heading up.
Indeed.
There. And it's brilliant. And they're all absolutely heaving, people sort of spilling out. And as you were saying earlier, the buzz around the place, it's great. But what I like is that, you know, the thing about Newcastle fans is that you've almost got 2 gears. One sort of anti-Ashley, and now this one absolutely sort of flying, and it's all emotion and it's all war flags, and it's the atmosphere there is fantastic. But Eddie will be the calmest person there, which is just coming back to Eddie, and that is so important. So but just coming back to, was it Gary's point about the Super League? They will come back, and it will be down to Newcastle fans campaigning, whether it's social media, whether it's at games, whether it's outside the ground, whether it's linking with the Football Supporters Association, who do such a brilliant job, whether it's lobbying MPs. I mean, whatever you think of Boris Johnson and the Tories, and I'm pretty apolitical, the fact is that they understand the power of fans at the moment. They saw what happened with the fans turning. And so that's why we've got Tracy Crouch's fan-led review. And I think you do have, you know, you've got both parties are really listening to fans at the moment, and that is key. So I'm confident that the fans will man the barricades, but I'm also fairly pessimistic and believe that the owners will be back and they will try to get another Super League going.
Definitely. Just going back to Amanda, I mean, she has, well, Amanda and my dad, really, both of them, but Amanda's really, really touched the hearts of all Newcastle fans, and especially the ladies team. Because the ladies team are playing at St James's Park on Sunday for the first time ever. Because currently they're under the Newcastle United Foundation, and Amanda wants to bring them into the Newcastle United fold. She's told them that all our plans, and that she wants them to become a Super League team. So that's even exciting for us as fans to see that she wants to develop everything, not just the first team or the ground. You know, the training ground, the ladies team, the academy, everything. She wants everything under one umbrella.
Well, I mean, it's exciting for 3 blokes. Can you imagine the excitement if you're a 5, 6, 7-year-old girl and you've got this chance of putting on that famous shirt and playing, you know, maybe playing in the ground? And I noticed, I follow Merdad on Twitter, and I noticed that he was sort of tweeting, and I think that, you know, the prices, I think it was under 16s free for Sunday's game, and then it was like sort of £3 or whatever. I mean, they were just I think that's absolutely fantastic, particularly at a time like this, you know, when people are worrying about, you know, I mean, I go fill up my car, you know, I mean, you almost have to take a mortgage out, and people with heating and eating and decisions like that, you know, Newcastle's not the wealthiest area of the country. So I do think that's important. And what we've seen, particularly in the last 3 years, is, I know you've had that sort of disengagement from Ashley, but I think if you look at people within the club and you look at the sport generally, clubs have become even more important parts of the community. They've rallied to the community during lockdown, during the pandemic, checking up on season ticket holders, you know, the elderly, the disadvantaged. Are you okay? You know, the food banks that you've been running for a long time. Sadly, it's, you know, what would be great is to go to a ground and not see a food bank, because then we wouldn't have food poverty. I mean, I came from a fairly sort of fortunate background, but it shames me that in the 21st century we do have food banks. But look, again, more power to your elbow. But I think what we've seen in the last 3 years is the importance of community, the importance of clubs, that emotional connection, and also clubs have been saving lives in the pandemic. With the food, and also people who are at home lonely. The fact that maybe someone from the club sent them an email, even called up. Watford had a brilliant scheme. You guys, you've got a good foundation. I know it was slightly overshadowed, and there were issues during the Ashley era, but you've got good people in that foundation. And I don't think communities have needed football clubs more than they've done in the last 3 years. Clubs are absolutely vital.
Yeah. Billy's got a question here, which I think a lot of Newcastle fans want to know, is about a certain Mr. Gascoigne. Just being, he's always in our hearts as Gaza up here, and obviously, his illnesses have been well sort of documented. But what about the follow him through his career, Henry? Did you have much to do with Gaza himself and any of his antics?
Yeah, a genius with the ball. I mean, I always made a difference between Gascoigne and Gaza. There was Gaza, who was the slightly sort of tabloid character, this perception of him. But I've had conversations with Gascoigne. I can remember one when England were training under Terry Venables, who he adored, at Bisham Abbey, where they used to train. And it must have been about 95. And it was the time when the FA were looking for a new technical director to give the sort of direction for the sort, how we should play, moving out of the long ball era, being more sort of, intelligent. And I asked Paul about it, and he gave a fantastic answer. He spoke for about 7-8 minutes about everything that was wrong in English football and how to address it. So you develop players, you get coaches into schools, skill coaches, diet as well.
Yeah,
Gascoigne talking about diet, but honestly, it was just fascinating to hear him. And then he made a couple of jokes, and those are the ones that turned into the headlines. But I just thought he was just there was a lot more to Paul Gascoigne than the whole sort of Gaza image suggested.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because, I mean, mainly in the media we only see the bad parts of Gaza, and we see the downside, if you like, the illnesses and things like that. But when he's been well, and he's been sort of interviewed by media up here, he's come across very well, and you can still see that burning football and brain of his still going, and he still sort of loves the area. He still loves Newcastle United. So it's just a shame the way things went for him, I suppose. But that's just one of them things. Alex, you got anything?
Yeah, no, it's a massive figure. I mean, Eddie Howe mentioned in a recent press conference, didn't he, that he alluded to the documentary on Gascoigne. So it seems to have affected, recent players, current staff. They're trying to, you mentioned Keegan, and Eddie Howe's definitely. I mean, maybe from a fan's perspective, I don't know how it looks like from a journalistic perspective, but he definitely looks like the staff are trying to emulate the connection to the fans, the hard work, and understanding the city and the squad and the history with the Gascoigne documentary and the references. I mean, how does that seem to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there was a Gascoigne film that came out, I think it was in 2015, and I was asked to host an event at a cinema in London, and there was Stuart Pearce, Paul Gascoigne on the panel, and Pete Davis, who wrote a very famous book on Italian 90 called All Played Out, where obviously Gascoigne, his skills and his tears sort of just took him into the hearts of the world. And I was basically told we would talk about the film, we'd talk about Newcastle, we'd talk about his England bit of Rangers. But if the organisers felt that it was all becoming a little bit too much for Paul, that they would give me a signal. And so I obviously kept an eye on Paul because this was a bit, there were about 400 people it was being filmed. I think they showed it up live in Newcastle on the cinemas up with you. And he was fine. He was answering all the questions, what it was like to sort of juggle the ball over Hendry's head and score against Scotland at Wembley in the Euro 96 and Italian 90. And he spoke fantastically. But then I noticed he was drifting and he was becoming a little bit nervous or distracted. At which point Stuart Pearce said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Gascoigne," and everyone stood up and applauded it and stopped it there, because Stuart, who knows Paul well, had basically sort of seen the early signs that Paul was beginning to get a little bit sort of twitchy. So look, Paul's been through so much in his life, some of it self-inflicted, but you read the stories and you see the the videos and the documentaries about what happened to him when that poor child, who he was supposedly in charge of, got run over. That can scar a person. So I look on Paul as one of the great entertainers of English football, a far more sort of intelligent individual in terms of when he's talking about the game. And he's just, look, he's absolutely loved up with you, and he's loved with England. I follow England, and I will walk into a ground, there'll be at least 4 or 5 Gascoigne, the grey one from the Euros '96. He's rightly revered.
Max has got a question here. Now, obviously, you mentioned the 4-3s before we came on air, Henry, which still pains me to this day. But Max says, "Good evening, Henry. What's the best game you've ever watched and worked on? And who, in your opinion, has been the best Newcastle United player that you've seen?"
Wow. Well, I like Bruno at the moment. I think he played, was it one pass in the Palace game when he volleyed the ball to Almiron?
It was the goal, yeah.
Right.
Off his chest, half volley. Yeah.
I mean, that deserves 2 assists, something like that. It is just, I love him. I mean, I was always a big fan of Philippe Albert. I just loved the way he played. I loved your chant for him. Keegan, I mean, I'm 58, 59. So, I mean, Super Mac. I can remember when Super Mac turned up in London. What an exciting day that was. Waddle, love Waddle. One of the great things about, many great things about Chris Waddle as a player, as a character. I mean, he's just as a singer, if you want, Glenn Hoddle. He would always turn out and play for the press team when he was on Radio 5 duty. And it was great because he would sort of sit in the centre circle, or not sit, he would sort of stand in the centre, and he would just play all these wonderful passes around. And it was like, I mean, for me, it was just like trying to learn a new language, and he was fluent. It was just a great. So players like him, I was quite friendly with Glenn Roeder, and there's an important charity. Obviously, he tragically passed away from a brain tumour about 2-3 years ago. And his family are having a race meeting at Newmarket, which is where he'd settled. And I always liked him. I mean, everyone thought of him as, he looked after Gaza on and off the pitch, but what a lovely player he was as well. So, many players, I mean, Asprilla. But if I was going to pick out, I mean, the 4-3s were great games, but if I was going to choose one game at St James's Park for just sheer chaos, from a journalistic perspective, from a footballing perspective, it would be the 2-1 against Sunderland, when it was Hullit's last game. Like, I remember being in the press room beforehand. Sorry, it's private grief for you, this. But I remember being in the press room beforehand, and Mark Lawrenson, who was doing Radio 5, just held up the team sheet, said, "This isn't a team sheet, this is a suicide notice."
Ferguson
or a suicide letter. Ferguson and Shearer on the bench, and against Sunderland, who I think had Quinn and Phillips up front, probably. You were going into a gunfight with a pea shooter, and the heavens opened. It was absolutely biblical, and I can remember standing in the old press room there with the wonderful Kath, probably for me the first lady of football, who was revered.
Yes.
I mean, Tea Lady probably doesn't do her justice.
No.
Sort of leading lady of the pot, the teapot. I mean, she was an amazing lady who'd seen everything. She'd seen players fighting on the pitch. She'd seen, I mean, she was just a legend. What amazing lady. And there's a wonderful picture of her up in the press room. I also nod to her because she was always so chatty and so nice. How was your journey? So standing in there were 2 of the sort of the legends of the northeastern press fraternity, who were standing there in their underpants, And it was because it was just absolutely chucked out. Everyone was sort of soaked through, but obviously you couldn't go back into the press room because you've got to cover the match. So we all unplugged our laptops. I think we were on laptops then from the wall, so we didn't get electrocuted. But I have to say that was one of the most amazing days. And then the press conference afterwards. And I don't know who won the race to go through Ruud Gullit's door the next day, whether it was Shearer or Ferguson. I mean, probably a fairly sort of even race between the two of them. But yeah, I think that one was pretty epic.
Yeah, I remember that for all the wrong reasons. Absolutely drenched. Terrible match. Knowing that we went with Paul Robinson up front and had Ferguson and Shearer on the bench, it was criminal from Gullit, and he never recovered from it. I mean, he was gone shortly after that anyway. But that match will always, again, stick in my throat for the wrong reasons. We're getting a lot of questions, Henry, in the comments about the actual takeover itself, and quite a lot of negativity from a lot of press, pundits, etc. Now, obviously, we as fans, we don't want to get politically involved. We know what's going on with human rights issues, and we're all, wanting to do something to improve that. We've often said that, hopefully now, this has happened, maybe we can educate them a little bit and things like that on how to sort of live lives and things like that. But footballing wise, it's a little bit difficult for Eddie Howe when he's facing all the questions of human rights, when he's just there to, he's there for football and simply football and nothing else. What do you make of it all? The negativity and things like that have been said about Newcastle, and still goes on, really.
I can only really talk for the way I write and the way I approach it, and that is, if I'm covering a Newcastle United event or match, I will make passing reference to sports washing, to my antipathy towards individuals who behead journalists, to the human rights. But that can only be a part of it. I think if you are going to turn a match report into 95% about sports washing, you're not really doing the job of covering that match. Absolutely, we have to mention, the Saudis and that element. But also, you also have to mention the fact that Saudi investment is in Downing Street. It is in all parts of our society, our businesses. I know people expect higher standards from football clubs because of the emotional attachment, they embody the community. But I don't think necessarily it's on Newcastle United fans to hold the moral compass for the nation. I think that is a much broader thing. I think you make a good point that the fact that it is debated, and so journalists like me, I've written critically of PIF and the Saudis and sports washing, and and I've done pieces with Amnesty. But you also have to reflect what is also happening on the pitch. For me, everything in football stems from the 90 minutes. It's about the football. It's about the match. And then it's about the issue of sports washing. It's about the issue of racism. It's about the issue of obesity. It's about the issue of greedy owners in America and maybe one or two places elsewhere. But for me, it has to come back to the football. And that is why I completely understand why my colleagues are asking those questions. But also, I don't think Eddie Howe is, he's a representative and he's the one put up there. And his life isn't simply about talking about headers and volleys. He also has to represent the club. But I think there has to be a balance there. And I think, the press conference should be balanced between, I don't want to put a percentage on it, but some questions about sports washing, but also some questions about, Bruno's amazing assist. The fact that I think, and we're checking the stats earlier, I think only Liverpool have got a better record than you in the Premier League in 2022. So I think I think we've got to balance these things. So yes, have some of the politics, but also remember that for many people, football is an escape. But also you can use it. Loads of my colleagues went off to Beijing for the Olympics. I went to Russia for the World Cup. And you use those opportunities to, without getting too high hand, moralistic about it, to shine a light on things. and if we're going to shine a light, just like I think the England footballers at some point will make a statement about Qatar and about their issues in going there. I mean, I've written about Qatar. I was in the room when the vote got announced. I just burst out laughing because it just made a mockery of the voting process. And then you look and you talk to Amnesty and you look at the issues going on there. So look, no one is perfect, but I have to say I did have a little bit of sympathy with Eddie Howe. And I know a lot of the journalists, and they're fantastic journalists, but there has to be a balance between a press conference being about the latest Amnesty report and about being injury updates. I think we can wind somewhere between the two.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. It's refreshing to hear that, because this is something I've spoken about in recent weeks, how there have been a lot of pressing things to talk about football-wise, and I feel like that balance has been misrepresented. Especially we've got injuries, people coming back from injury, tactical changes, a lot of issues on the pitch, transfers, a lot of things to talk about, and quite often the conversation steers, in my opinion, too much to one side. And you mentioned not putting percentages on it. That's fair enough. Obviously, they have a responsibility to investigate every issue as journalists. But I wish everybody took your approach and we got to hear a little bit more about the football, because that's ultimately what the fans want to hear about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's probably I don't know what other people think. I just think I probably echo the view of some, not all. But I also think that, is Eddie Howe necessarily the right person to be asking the questions to? If you're asking Amanda or the Rubens or Pia, I think at some point they have to sort of clarify that and maybe have someone who can take some of those questions. But
we had this conversation in a show about, should clubs have a
general manager,
like some sort of person or sort of coordinator, or somebody who takes political or alternate questions. It was a bit of a chaotic conversation, but an interesting one, and it's possibly one that clubs should look into.
They do in Germany, and I've always called it the Oliver Bierhoff position. So it's not someone who is a tech. I mean, Bierhoff's obviously a great player, but he would answer. He would deal with questions like that because he would be at board level and he would have the sanctions. I think you maybe do need someone who's at board level to deal with that, because otherwise, all these press conferences are going to go down a similar route. You're going to get people asking the same sort of questions, and Eddie Howe's going to be going, well, listen, I mean, Eddie Howe is, he's not simply a football man. He's got a conscience. I'm sure he'll be very aware of all these issues, but it's not simply for him to have to answer them. I think maybe some people on the board should show their faces a little bit more in terms of to the media.
David Crone asked a question, with the Chelsea situation and Man United rebuild, does Henry see us competing with the likes of Spurs, Arsenal and West Hams of this world for top 4 place next season, or is it too early?
You're 9th at the moment, aren't you? You are building, you will buy, you'll develop. The players clearly already responding to Eddie's situation. Manchester United under Ten Hag will kick on. They need a huge clear out. Arsenal, you can see the way they're developing. They've got rid of a big ego. Or sent him off on loan in terms of Aubameyang. They're looking at, they've got a fantastic Hairland Academy. Mertesack's running that. They've got good young talent coming through from there. You can see that with Smith Rowe and Saka, one or two others. And that's one thing I would like Newcastle to do. And I remember having a chat with, I think it was with Amanda or Merdad about it a year or so ago. About it. So that's right, because I just finished writing a book with Michael Carrick. And Michael Carrick had got on, it's Newcastle Central, the main station, isn't it? And he would be getting on there with other young, local, talented players and heading to clubs in the south. Obviously, West Ham United in Michael's case, Shearer, Southampton. I don't need to tell you these. You almost need to put a net around that station and just stop this talent draining away. And I do think for the first time, I remember Shearer actually had a press conference. Was it just before you went down? Under him, when he was in charge for those few games, and I came up and just listened to him because I always enjoy listening to Shearer. And sorry, when we're talking about great players, I'll obviously have him and Soles in there. But Shearer spoke about this. Was Shearer Cramlington Juniors? I can't remember which club he was, or Wallsend, one of the clubs. But you've got all these great boys clubs. Wallsend. Was it Wallsend?
Wallsend Boys Club, yeah.
100 caps. you know, for England, obviously Michael and players like that. I think even Sting was there as well. So you produced looking at your guitar in the background. So you know, you've got these sort of dream factories. So make that pathway more from those, you know, where the kids first play, and then going into, because you are a hotbed of football, and then going into to the club. So that is an important thing also from FFP, which will be an issue, particularly until you really start generating, you become the horrible phrase, a sort of global brand, and you start generating and getting sort of more of the big bucks deals. Have some young, local, hungry players coming in. Don't let them sort of slip off south. But, you know, you will get some fantastic new players in the summer. So in terms of coming back to the question, I mean, I think it's an organic process, but it's a little bit like Kieran Trippier's injury. Don't rush. Just let it, you know, just build. Start strengthening. I mean, they're probably about 5 or 6 players. I mean, you'd know better than I would, but like the sort of Clarks and the Riches, maybe Hayden, maybe Mankio, who you will, so it sounds, you know, these are hardworking professionals, but you almost need to sort of upgrade on them and sort of gradually do that. But I just like the idea that it's an organic process, every message that's coming out. And then you will bring in someone who will hit the ground running like Bruno. But the good thing about what Newcastle did with him, they didn't just sort of judge him as a player. They looked at him as a character, someone who would be able to cope with running out in front of 55,000 passionate fans, who would have the sort of personality to deal with playing in the Premier League, who would be completely professional. So, you know, I think you will build, you will compete. I think they're probably 6 or 7 clubs ahead of you, but Europe in the next year or so, definitely.
V says, is there a Newcastle player, past or present, that you haven't interviewed that you would love to sit down with or would have loved to have spoken to?
Wow. Past or present? I'm not old enough, but I mean, Hughie Gallagher, you know, you read all the stories about him. I've read the biographies of him, seen some of the footage. He was a legend. I've never interviewed Malcolm McDonald, but I've had the great privilege of being in the press room, and he's there, and you have a chat and a cup of tea with him. And whenever I talk to Super Mac, I always learn something. He tells me something about the game, tells me something about Newcastle, how they're going to play, how things are developing. I find him, and he's very much a sort of name from my youth, particularly when he came south and he came to London. I can remember watching him just sort of slightly starry-eyed. And he was just, you know, someone who went to sort of different grounds in London if Super Mac was playing. So, you've got, I mean, there's, you know, so many, but I would say Super Mac.
Fair enough. Foxy wanted to know as well how it all got started for you in journalism, Henry. Did you want to always be in the media, or did you start off as something else?
Well, as your life is all in black and white, I mean, it was so long ago when I started, that was definitely in black and white. It was probably Pathé News was one of my first jobs. No, I mean, the job I've got now as chief football writer of the Times was the one I wanted when I was about 14, 15, because there was a great writer then, this was in the 70s, mid to late 70s, and who I used to read at school. And he would cover the match, but he would also cover crazy things like, you know, what the journey was like walking to the ground. He did it. He wrote about 900-word match report for Maracana on an England game, and it was all about, you know, his mad taxi drive from the station. So for me, I want about the match. I want to write about the match. I want about the headers and volleys. But it's about community. It's about you guys with the food bank. It's about the changing media as well, like this. You know, you guys are very much the present and the future. It's about the community. It's about the characters. And I've been very fortunate with the current generation of England players. You sit down and you talk to them and you hear about their backstory. And for me, it gives me another glimpse on, you know, different areas of English life, different mindsets. And I find it fascinating. So it was, without sort of going on about background, I mean, most of the sort of guys I went to school with, they either went on and became musicians, politicians, doctors, lawyers, 1 or 2 criminals, accountants, whatever. I was always had my heart set on being a football writer. University, they just said, as long as you're playing for the first team, and you're editing, sports editor of the student newspaper. Go and do what you want. I can't even remember what my degree was in. So, but I think that's important. Whatever you do in life, and I tell this to my kids, whatever you do, just do it with a passion, because you get one shot at this life, and and that's why it's great. I go down round to sort of universities where they've got sports journalism and football journalism courses, and I just see all this talent flooding out. I think this is just fantastic. All that energy, all that enthusiasm, and particularly that generation, who've probably had part of their sort of college and school years disrupted by COVID. I was thinking, go and explore the world and do whatever you do with a passion. Obviously, we all have to do certain things for money. That is obviously it's key. It puts bread on the table. But just do it with a passion. And I've been very fortunate in my job. I mean, I lost a bet with Newcastle fans a few years ago over Alan Pardew and ended up having to swim the time. That was not one of my greatest days. I think it was a Manchester United match. And the Sky reporter came down and he was very excited because he said, "We've never had a drowning in high definition before." And I said, "Oh, thanks, mate." But you've got to seize these opportunities, like running the Great North Run and whatever, and just meeting people like the great, Liz Luff, who works on the Sir Bobby Robson Foundation, and meeting Lady Robson and interviewing her for a book I wrote. She was so helpful. But just that, I love every day to be different. And I always keep my passport in my pocket just in case something happens and you've got to travel somewhere. But whatever you do, just do it 100%.
Well, you mentioned Bobby Robson then. There's more of a personal, selfish question from myself, but Bobby Robson is one of the biggest figures for me personally for the club. Have you got anything you could tell me story-wise or interesting little tidbits that maybe I wouldn't know that's not out there?
I was fortunate enough to interview him down the years, and I can remember interviewing him when he was Newcastle manager. I can't remember what year it was, but he was living in a part of the Northwest where Gary Speed, God rest his soul, was his neighbour, and Gary was giving Sir Bobby a lift back home afterwards. And I think it was Hazel, the lady who was the press officer at the time. She'd set up the interview, everything's fine, being coded by the club. And she said, "You got 25 minutes with Bobby." And I had a slight wry smile on my face because if you know Sir Bobby when he talked. And anyway, he was talking, and about sort of 35 minutes in, Gary Speed was sitting in the corner, sort of jangling his sort of car keys, ready to give Bobby a lift back, but just laughing his head off because he just knew Bobby was still basically on the second or third question. And the press officer walked in and said, "Henry, your time's up." And Bobby looked at her and he said, "Well, we're only halfway through Italian 90. I've got loads more to talk about." And he was just one of those sort of life-affirming characters, God rest his soul. Yeah. He was just one of the great men as well as the great football men. And it's one of the days I will always, always, always remember was in Durham Cathedral, which was, I was a choir boy in Westminster Abbey. It was, so going into somewhere like Durham Cathedral, seeing the Venerable Bede, amazing building, great acoustics. But so the Sir Bobby Robson's memorial there was just one of the most moving occasions that I've ever been to. And I remember sitting in the pew, looking around at all the former England managers, all the great players, all the dignitaries from Barcelona and PS and FA people there, and just thinking, there is a man who has lived a life to his full. And the work and his legacy lives on in his principles and obviously in the amazing fundraising that his foundation still does. So yeah, seize every opportunity, and if you can live a tenth of the life of a Sir Bobby Robson, you have done well.
Yeah, you've had a good life. Also, there's a few questions popped in about Mr. Bruce, I mean, look, I'm not going to put you on the spot what you think of the man. I'm just sort of management-wise.
You can ask me what you like. I'll tell you. I like him as a man. I think no one manages for more than 1,000 games without having something about him. I've been in his office and his company down the years and seen how he has protected clubs. I just think that I think he was so associated with Mike Ashley. I think it was difficult. The football obviously wasn't great. He probably didn't have the investment. But you know what? Whatever you think of Steve Bruce as a manager, he's a good man. I know that people will have a go at him, but he's a.
Did we see the
substance to it?
Yeah. Did we see the real? I mean, obviously you probably know Steve Bruce better than us Newcastle fans because we didn't really know him personally. So his management style didn't suit us. The football, as you said, wasn't great. But did we really see the real side of Steve Bruce in a way? Or did we just see the football manager and not much of his personality was able to come out in the job because it was such a stressful one?
It was a very stressful one, and I worried about Steve's health for a while. I listened to him sometimes in press conference and thought, just don't bite. I mean, I know Craig Hope. I've got huge respect for him, the Daily Mail journalist. But sometimes, if you disagree with what someone's written, don't bite. Just sort of rise above it. And a lot of Craig, well, all of what Craig writes is invariably very well sourced. But in terms of Steve, look, there's a good man there, and I think and I felt for him because he's a proud Georgian. I think he was at Wallsend Boys Club, wasn't he? Because I think if you look on the wall there, and I think Michael Carrick's wonderful father, Vince, he's got this sort of sign, this Wallsend Boys Club sign, and it's got all the players who've represented England, so 5 or 6. I think Forster's in there now, Fraser Forster, but Steve was only England B. And, you just think what a centre-half he was for sort of Manchester United down the years. He's a good football man and he's a good man. And I have to say, and he was hurt by the criticism, undoubtedly. But look, he was the wrong man at the wrong time with the wrong owner. So, I had sympathy for him for that. But I think he was, he's a good man. And I hope when he goes back up to Newcastle, whether just seeing relatives, family, friends, whatever. And I hope if he goes into the ground, I hope you give him a good reception because he's not a bad man. He's a good man.
And what do you think about his current time at West Brom professionally? Because obviously he had a little bit of a break. And if you look at the table, the championship table since he took over, if you factor in the table since he took over, it has them in 20th for form. Obviously, he inherited a squad pushing for playoffs. Some people have said that they were a rotten squad who were overperforming. I mean, obviously, it's a step down managing in the Championship. Do we think it's just a difficult job? It's an isolated case, or do we think his ability is not what it was?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a lot of whataboutery in this, and I know there's a lot of Schadenfreude, and people probably enjoying seeing him. Newcastle fans, many Newcastle fans, enjoying him struggling. But you can separate them. He didn't do a good job. Or good enough job at Newcastle, but you have to understand that the pressures and the strains. I actually thought he might have retired. I just thought he's managed for so long. He's got to look after his health. That is a key thing. So yeah, look, West Brom, but I mean, look, they backed him for next season. So, but he's maybe that is at this stage of his career. That's his level. But the way you were going. Steve Bruce wasn't going to be part of that, so it didn't surprise me when he left. I mean, I saw him and I nodded to him at one of his last sort of press conferences because, again, coming back to it, he's a good man and he's a proud Geordie, and what happened would have hurt him.
Well, what do you think about him? I mean, a little bit controversial, but he has mentioned this week about requiring the players to live within 1 hour of the training ground at West Brom. However, he does live slightly too far away,
He's got to do that. I mean, I will sort of joke with players when I'm stuck on the M6 is because so many of them are shuttling up and down because they like living in the south of Manchester. I mean, I think that was an issue at Stoke. It was an issue at Leicester. It was an issue. I mean, I live in the Midlands, and it was, I go up the sort of the A50 and on the M6, and I would just suddenly see Range Rovers sort of flying past me, or not actually, given the M6. So yeah, it's a. Actually, I think that's right. I think would you want your players to live? What's an hour south of Newcastle? Harrogate? Is Harrogate about an hour?
Yeah, around about the Harrogate, York.
Okay, now look, Harrogate's lovely. It's got Betty's tea room, but I don't think I would necessarily want my centre forward schlepping up and down the A1. I think you should live local.
Do you think it's a bit unfair, though, if he's not setting an example to his players by moving himself? Or would you not expect that?
Can I say at some point you're going to have to move on from Steve Bruce? not tonight, but in terms of a mindset, you've got Eddie Howe.
We are.
You've got Eddie Howe. Just sort of. It's like going on about a sort of an ex that you had a bit of a difficult breakup.
I think it's tough because
you're now with a supermodel. Yeah, okay, but
it's a massive contrast. Yeah,
I take your point. If he's got to move, I don't know whether he's got a flat in in West Bromwich, in that area, in the Black Country. There's some beautiful parts within an hour. You sort of head slightly west, and it's lovely. He could live at the Belfry. There.
I think we're just of a mindset because of what we're seeing now, and how Steve worked to how Eddie works is very, very different. But that's always going to be the case. Managers have their own way of working, and I think that's why Steve Bruce keeps propping up, because we think, wow, under Steve Bruce we didn't do this, or we did do this. Under Eddie we're not doing. It's a totally different experience for us now as Newcastle fans, because the way Eddie's just come in and he's changed the whole
sleep
mindset.
Coaches, which we haven't heard that since Alex Ferguson in the 90s. He's mentioning all of these, modern, groundbreaking coaching tactics. We're not used to it, and it's very impressive.
With respect, I think you'd be hard pushed to go into a Premier League training ground and not have someone who's telling you about sleep, coaches, and blue rays and everything like that. I mean, the players should know about that, but also with for A, move on from Steve, and B, you are comparing the ends of a manager's career, i.e. Steve Bruce at Newcastle, with the start of Eddie Howe's career, and it's obviously a completely different vibe. And also, I just think, show a bit more respect to Eddie. Don't keep bringing up Steve Bruce. You've moved on. You're with a fantastic new partner. Don't worry about your old one. There's some bad memories with them.
Yeah, good point. Well said. That's us told. Right. Just before we go, because we've been on an hour now, so it's. I just want to mention about the European nights for Newcastle, Henry. Obviously, you told us a story about Drogba and things like that. I mean, you must have had some fantastic experiences of Newcastle in Europe.
Keith Gillespie, was that the 3-3 Barcelona?
3-2 win at St James's.
3-2. Sorry, apologies.
Yeah.
That's another match report I cocked up. I mean, Gillespie, what an interesting character. I didn't know what he was going through at the time, which you heard subsequently.
I don't think anybody did, actually. Yeah.
I mean, you knew he was a sort of slightly, quiet individual, but I have to say I do remember that night when Andy Cole was sold. I mean, that was just extraordinary. I think it was at Bramall Lane. Kevin Keegan came out on the steps and talked about it.
It was at St James's Park. He came out because there was a crowd of people turned up. And credit to Kevin, he came out and said exactly why he did it and what his plans were, and we trusted him, and look what happened after that. I mean, obviously he brought in Les Ferdinand, and then Alan Shearer came along, and Andy Cole was long forgotten. I mean, it was not completely forgotten because he did a lot for us, obviously, but at the time, I mean, I don't think you'd see a manager doing that these days, coming out and confronting the fans like that. But what he said was just totally correct.
But that's Kevin Keegan. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He has this engagement with the fans. But just on Andy Cole, I don't think he's properly appreciated in this country for what he's done. Obviously, he had his sort of limitations with England in terms of getting a position, because there was Ian Wright, as you say, there was Ferdinand and Shearer, and all these sort of strike Teddy Sheringham were sort of around. But what a player he was. I mean, that season that he had with you, because I can remember a game he played when it was your promotion season, when you were sort of heading towards the top division. He was utterly unplayable. He was brilliant. The ball sort of pinging in. He was fantastic striker, one of the best finishers I've seen, and a really interesting guy. Another one of these individuals, you think, well, he's slightly one-dimensional, but when you scratch the surface and you get talking to him, you hear Andy on the radio and the television now, and he's a really interesting character. So, but just coming back to me, I wasn't telling you off, and I think the last time I got told off by Geordies, I ended up swimming the Tyne. And I got.
No, you are right. You are right, because a lot of Newcastle fans do say to move on. I think we asked about Steve Bruce because it was interesting to get your opinion. Because
I don't want to swim the Tyne again, because
no.
Just before I dived in, there was some people on the quayside who came down and watched, and they said, "Watch out for the brown fish." And I said, "What brown fish?" And then someone explained what they were.
Oh yes, the brown fish. Yeah.
You can probably imagine.
Yes,
so
indeed,
it wasn't the nicest.
No, I wouldn't worry. Alan Pardew is in Bulgaria now, so he's long gone.
He's good.
Yeah. No, I just find it intriguing to get your opinion, because all we hear up here is obviously people's opinion on ex-managers, and but it's nice to speak to someone who is in the media who has had something to do with him and knows him on a personal level, because I don't think we ever got to see his personality, and that's why we asked about him. But you're right, Newcastle I think it's difficult for us to move on because we're still in shock at what has happened in the last 6 months. You know, we've had 14 years of no ambition, no positivity, no nothing, and then suddenly these last 6 months have been like a complete whirlwind to us.
Yeah.
And
2.5 million average net spend per season under Ashley.
It's difficult for us to kind of, you know, it's very strange, if you like.
But you've been liberated.
Yes.
So the cloud has gone. Go out and enjoy the sunshine.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Can I just mention internationals before we lose you? Obviously, we're not blessed with a huge list of internationals. Not in recent history. Obviously, we've had Townsend, I think, made one cap while he was playing for us. I think we had, I'm not sure if Carroll still played for us. So there's a few smatterings of internationals. Do you see potentially Trippier getting back into the squad while he's still with us, or can you see any England stars in our current setup?
Certainly Trippier, because because of what he offers. He can play as a right back, he can play as a right wing back. I've seen him, I think he even captained England from left wing back. And Southgate very much likes, it's the All Black things. He likes good characters. He likes good citizens. He likes people who are going to be around the hotel for a month and will be ebullient on the last day as they were on the first day, who are as ebullient and upbeat and positive in adversity as they are after a good win. So I think that Trippier's got a chance of going to Qatar. I mean, his one misfortune is that England could probably field an 11 of fantastic right backs, but he's versatile and he's and his character is supreme, and that is one of the reasons why Eddie Howe and the club brought him in, and why he's such an important figure in the dressing room. As for others, I've had a spin through. I mean we have Dan Burn,
who is people were calling for.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Burn's done really well for you. And I love the story of, the sort of rejection and working the supermarket and coming back. And that sort of narrative is the type of thing that Southgate respects. People who've had adversity, setbacks early on in their career and then have fought back. He can obviously play on the left of a three. I have to say I would still be surprised. I think Tyrone Mings would go ahead of him if it was a straight fight between the two of them.
Interesting. Because obviously Harry Maguire's having a difficult time as well, isn't he? But
and Dan Burn's done very well in the back four this season, but it is a limited sample size. So
but I just think that but you'll have more and more of this as you will be linked and you recruit more and more. But what I also hope is that you start developing these players. You get another Carrick who steps into your midfield and doesn't step on a train south.
Which I think will happen. I really genuinely do, because of what the new owners have said and what the plans are to develop the youth, to really just focus on the academy, bring youngsters through. I think we could see. No, I'm not saying loads of players coming through, but I could see one or two coming through. And the days are gone where we're a selling club. I think that's something that is really positive for us, that we don't have to sell anybody anymore. I mean, there's plenty there that we want sold, but we don't have to sell. So it's exciting times for us in that way as well. Before you go, Henry, a prediction for tomorrow's game. How do you think it's going to go?
Just one longer term prediction, and it relates to your last point. Liverpool. I mean, I always associate players going from Newcastle to Liverpool in recent years. Ronaldo. Going back, I remember interviewing Didi Hamann at Newcastle. What an interesting character he was. We talked about football, and I said, "What have you been doing up here?" And he said, "Well, I've gone up to Hadrian's Wall. I've gone to Lindisfarne," because Didi's one of these characters who's interested in life. That is, it's almost symbolic. You think of all those players who've gone from you and gone to Liverpool. That has got to be stopped. You've got to keep this talent in Newcastle. And I think with these owners and with a manager like Eddie and with a statement of intent like Bruno, I think you will do. In terms of tomorrow, the two best teams in the world are Manchester City and Liverpool. And I just think that when you look at Klopp's team, you look at the momentum, you look at all the individuals taking responsibility, you look at the strength in depth. I mean, if your bench goes up against Liverpool's tomorrow, it will be about 7-0, in the warm-up, because they've got that strength in depth. You know, if Mane goes and plays in the middle because Firmino's not playing, Luis Diaz, who's hit the ground running, you know, he comes in there. Mo Salah's just been voted Footballer of the Year. Jordan Henderson, who I imagine might get a bit of stick with his Sunderland connections.
I don't know what you mean.
He will love that. I imagine, did Fabinho dive in the last game? I imagine one or two.
Well, we're very bitter about the game at Anfield because we thought that was the Mike Dean show.
Right.
You know, when Hayden was down with a head injury, didn't blow the whistle,
right.
Their first goal. We should have had a penalty when Alexander-Arnold tripped over Fraser when he was clean through. We also thought that he stepped in front of the ball as Alexander-Arnold scored. And he also gave us a wink where in the away end when we were singing that it was all about him. So we don't hold him in high esteem.
He's on the VAR tomorrow as well.
He's on bloody VAR.
I think it's great that you lot have moved on so quickly.
Well, you know what we're like. We don't move on quick.
No, but I mean, your issue will be their defence doesn't give much away. Was it 3 consecutive clean sheets?
Yeah,
now?
we've really tightened up. Yeah.
It's no. I'm talking about
Liverpool. Yeah, Liverpool.
You know,
as well,
that is going to. Well, you've definitely tightened up, and
Yeah.
Burns been excellent, and Howe and Tillman's coaching is really good.
Mm-hmm.
But it will be. I think it'll be slightly closer than people think. But if I'm going to give a prediction before I get thrown in the Tyne again, it will be a narrow Liverpool win.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think. Listen, I think if we don't win and we do lose, we want to lose, giving them a good game. Let Liverpool come off the pitch.
Well, I don't think Eddie Howe will play a back five. I think he likes his 4-3-3s. He likes his attacking football. I mean, we looked in the preview show at how Leicester managed to beat them 1-0 in December by being compact, and obviously Lookman did some fancy things on the left side and caught Trent out of position. So we do have some nice left-sided players in St. Maximin and Joe Linton. So fingers crossed we can replicate something similar.
Attack, but also that's the Newcastle way. I mean, you look at Everton and you look at Villarreal, and I covered both of those games, and you knew what was going to happen after the hour. Liverpool's strength and depth, their strength of personality, the technique and the energy they've got all over. The fullbacks will fly forward and they'll create chances. So, but look, it's going to be a good game. And this is, I know everyone's saying, "Oh, let's win the title." Actually, I don't think Newcastle fans are. I think you're pretty balanced in terms of your understanding of the process and the progression over the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So, whatever happens tomorrow, you're on an upward path, and just forget about Steve Bruce.
We will. That's a promise. Absolute promise. Thank you very much. Henry, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking time out on a Friday night to come and join us. It's been great getting your insight into things, and we'll hopefully speak to you again very soon.
Definitely. It's lovely to talk to Newcastle United fans without ending up in the Tyne.
Exactly. We wouldn't do that. Don't worry.
Yeah, cheers.
Thanks
Good
very
luck
much,
tomorrow.
Henry.
Good luck tomorrow.
Thank you. Take care.
Cheers.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Getting Henry's insight into many things, Alex. And, obviously, you're saying it might be a slim win for Liverpool tomorrow. I think a lot of people are expecting Liverpool to win. However, you never know. You just never know.
It's lovely. Half the time we have these interesting questions and comments. We're just sending them out into the universe. But with being able to speak to Henry, we can actually have a response to that, to certain questions. It's incredible. And now I have made a promise to the legend that is Henry Winter that I will no longer speak of Steve Bruce, and I won't. We have moved on. That is it. But I hope people understand why we asked him that, because obviously, we didn't know Steve Bruce personally. Henry does. And it was interesting to get his insight into how he felt about things. And it's just a question that we had to ask. Indeed. And Henry was great, a good laugh as well, and took it in good jest, which is what the man's all about. Certainly the times I've spoken to him, he's been very, very upbeat and friendly, and to give up his time tonight on a Friday night for us is absolutely fantastic. So I hope you've really enjoyed the show, guys. Thank you so much for joining and some of your questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to ask all your questions, but you can understand we're on a tight schedule with Henry tonight, so we picked a few out that came through, and then obviously let Henry lead the show as he should, really being our guest. So thank you very much for everybody for tuning in. We also have a watch along tomorrow with Billy. Give him your support, guys. It's his first one on this channel, doing the home game, and I'm sure he'll smash it. But please do tune in.
As I say, watch it on the telly, but turn the commentary off. Listen to Billy. He's a cracking commentator, and you really enjoy it. So for alternative commentary and the watch along, tune in from 12 o'clock tomorrow on this very channel. And then 8 o'clock on Sunday night, we will be doing the match review as well as the ladies' game as well. So that should be a really great show as well. And I will be releasing a video after the game tomorrow with the instant reaction. But thank you to everybody for tuning in tonight. Alex, thank you for joining me. I know you were a bit nervous. I think we all were, but it's just really down to earth.
Fun.
Really down to earth. Yeah, so that's it, guys. Have a great weekend. Thank you, mods, again for keeping the chat nice and friendly. And we will see you for the watch along tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Until then, guys, have a cracking weekend. Be kind and stay safe. Good night.